Good evening. The Pale King, known for many things within the Hollow Knight universe, his unendingly godlike power along with his unendingly vague and mysterious death, copulating like there's no tomorrow, infanticide, his bizarrely underpowered chore made from the union between him and another almighty god, and buzzsaws. All of the buzzsaws. While the joke's often that the Pale King has a fetish for these things, or a concept approximate to that, to my knowledge not many, if any, have settled on a genuine answer as to what their purpose is. However, one day, while fighting the Water Knights, I had an epiphany followed by a chain of realizations, culminating into an idea of what the Pale King's plan potentially was, explaining almost everything about the vessels, royal family, and their odd placement and actions in the story of the game. And it's kinda crazy, so to begin, let's go back. Way back. I'm going to start by explaining what the common consensus and agreed upon lore of the Pale King and the main storyline of the game is before attempting to weave my theory into it. So here goes with the catch-up. In the beginning, there was this girl, moth, thing, the Radiance, goddess of dreams, and she was worshipped by the moths she created of this bug kingdom, Hallownest, with an A. Many other groups within the kingdom had their own gods as well, but this particular one, along with another, we'll be paying the most attention to. The other one we shall be following is this one, the Worm, spelled with a Y, who has recently arrived, and by arrived, I mean burrowed into Hallownest before promptly dying and reforming out of this egg into a version of himself that was more approachable of a form for this land he wishes to rule. Over time, he ascended the creatures' minds and provided them sapience, an intellectual advantage in comparison to the bugs outside of the kingdom who only live on instinct, where anyone of Hallownest would lose memories if one should go out there. He also has foresight, something that will be very important in this theory, with much attention being brought to the Worm, otherwise known as the Pale King, across the kingdom. The Moth tribe abandoned their old goddess to worship him, and thus the Radiance is forgotten in the Dream Realm. Eventually, a fully revamped kingdom is established, civilized people, advanced technology, gods worshipped, and Hallownest finds peace. Until that moth bitch comes back with this rat Fanta shit that makes you scream and explode. This is the infection, and despite its name, it isn't entirely biologically based, although it does seem to have a gaseous form which is capable of physically spreading. If I have it abridged correctly, it corrupts the victim's mind and will through dreams, making one hostile, which, when it comes to the usage of the word dreams in that definition, I'm assuming we're not to take literally since you would just need to not sleep or not dream to not get infected, which is simply not the case. We see plenty of times exemplified where dreams can essentially just mean thoughts or memory, along with having its own realm which seems to depict the mind of which you enter the realm through, though there still are plenty of cases where the dream nail, an item we will eventually discuss, truly does grant the wielder access to another bug's dreams. I just wanted to clarify what the game tends to mean when referring to dreams. With their dreams, mind, and will corrupted, they will also grow orange cysts, swell up, and be reverted to what is essentially their base instincts. So now, with a new infection spread throughout the kingdom, the Pale King tries to rid the kingdom of it. What the Pale King needed to be able to contain the infection is a being that could focus the radiance and thus the source of the infection within its shell without any mind, will, or voice, not sure why that part's important, that could be corrupted by either of those two. I think, given how powerful he is shown to be, he could have the ability to grab the radiance and put both her and the infection inside of a vessel, even if he isn't capable of enough power to go into the dream realm and kill her outright. We do see that he's capable of bringing his entire palace into the dream realm. Don't worry, we'll get to all of that. The Pale King in the normal realm has to be one of the most powerful beings in the world, along with his wife the White Lady, so to make a vessel strong enough to hold an entire goddess in the state where she is at most power inside of its body, he has children, and a goddamn lot of them, with the White Lady to create such a shell. There is also this other power that he has discovered to oppose the light that the Radiance is representative of, the Void, deep within the bowels of the kingdom in an area known as the Abyss. It has the ability to hollow out a bug's shell if need be, most likely how it got its name, often leaving the creature as a corpse that is essentially empty on the inside with just a skeleton on the outside, being bugs and all that. However, there is another way that Void can hollow out a bug while still leaving it with a technical consciousness and without the mind or will that could be corrupted by the infection. This seems to take form in a shade, a ghost-adjacent form found within the shells of these children, who from now on we'll call vessels. So the next part of his plan is to take this highly powerful shell and then have it corrupted by the Void, effectively giving it a hollow consciousness, or at least that's what the Void is supposed to do, but because the Void is a spiteful prick I guess, it instead hollows it out as it normally would, leaving just a dead body, so the power couple naturally do what any sane couple would do with one's own children. which would explain why the failed vessels look like they're already dead when they're falling down and clunk like skeletons instead of normal corpses which still have organs in them. Now comes what has to be the hardest part for the two, sacrificing multiple of their children. That's a detail I think goes unappreciated and is part of the lore. The White Lady knew just as much about what was happening to solve the infection problem as the Pale King did, but I swear I never hear anything about her taking part in it. There's never any indication that this was something the two disagreed upon as far as I know. Like the Pale King pressed on with this despite his wife's wishes, she even admits that she feels some shame from the part she willingly played, to the point where she's chaining herself so that she can't have any more children. Besides, the idea that the breeding was one-sided is a bit dark even for this game's lore. Anyway, back on track, what about the whole thinking void thing? If a vessel is meant to be without mind, will, or voice, would in the presence of the knight we play as being able to walk, fight, work towards a goal, draw maps, and open bank accounts be a contradiction to all of that? See, the idea that the void can have a consciousness, dare I say, a mind, will, and voice, while simultaneously carrying an emptiness is something that explains a lot. The Shade Lord has a roar, the knight is able to access an abyss shriek in a temple full of screaming heads at the bottom of the abyss, which, when dream-nailed, say our voices will cry out again, implying that void beings at some point in time or another had voices. Each shade we see, each creature composed of some void practically has all of these things: voice, will, and mind. What the Pale King is essentially doing is describing an inanimate object, which funnily enough, the void also seems to simultaneously be inanimate in some forms while also being animate in others. I liken what he claims about the vessels to if he were describing the creation of a robot that was still organic but only would follow its programming without any mind, will, or voice of its own. Each decision it makes is essentially that of an AI trying to figure out the best way towards its given goal. But do we have any proof that the Pale King can program the void and make it command a vessel? Why, yes we do. When you first enter the White Palace, the very first thing you come across is this: a king's mold guarding the palace. You fight it, you kill it, you enter the palace, and you fight with many of them throughout it. You will also encounter these things: wings molds, typically used to be a pogo for your nail for extra vertical boost and refreshing your double jump. If you go far enough into the White Palace, you'll come across a room filled with kings and wings mold parts, and within it you can see mold stones that when dream nailed show simply one word: serve, confirming the concept that the Pale King can program and harness the void, at the very least for a construct, possibly being easier as the shell it is trying to control isn't even alive in the first place, and the void has its own body to command inside of the armor similar to the Shades. These essentially function as beta vessels, where with the Hollow Knight, its programming was the monologue spoken while you ascend and descend the birthplace in the knight's dream. No cause too great, no mind to think, no will to break, no voice to cry suffering. Born of God and void, you shall seal the blinding light that plagues their dreams. You are the vessel. You are the Hollow Knight. With all that in mind, one last run over of how he creates the vessels before we go through certain flaws in the theory and try to fix them. What the Pale King would do is grab a group of vessels and hold them over the abyss, supposedly with telekinesis if he has that. He would then take the programmed void and imbue it into them. The void would either act normally and hollow them out, turning them into a skeletal corpse to be dropped into the abyss, their shade to become another part of the void's normal mindset, like the thrashing monsters in the lake, or the void would take to its programming and a knight would be created, living and in his eyes ascending beyond the void's corruption, causing this line in the lore tablet at the entrance to the abyss. The problem was the latter was quite the anomaly, and in some cases the void would kill the vessel initially, only for it to reform properly and live, thus creating our knight and others that survived. But the Hollow Knight came first, and therefore the rest were abandoned, despite some escaping. So I now ask, if he does have genuine magical see-into-the-future foresight as indicated by Bardoon and the shroom in the fungal wastes, why not assess the future of this Hollow Knight specifically? Why not look into the future of testing more vessels and see whether they have it in them? Boredom? Amusement? Bad arithmetic? Do we find out at long last after all this time that the Pale King is weak in math skills? If I were to attempt to address these questions, thus potentially complicating the theory beyond the machinations of Team Cherry, I would initially say that the Pale King to a degree knew the Hollow Knight would end up being defective due to needing the void unified under its will to be able to absorb the radiance safely. More on that later. Yet with how long it has taken to test this many vessels just to get one that was able to work and live, assuming that he doesn't know of the alive knights in the bottom of the abyss, and needing a solution, even a temporary one, out quickly, he decides to go forth with it anyway, but let's just say that this has many flaws. One of the bigger problems is that of the Godseekers, who, to keep things abridged, have a whole set of events in their endeavors that would result in the previously mentioned Shade Lord, a being who just absolutely murders the Radiance without having to even enter the Black Egg, or absorb her in the Void. It just fucking disintegrates her, instantly freeing the kingdom from the infection, including the Hollow Knight, allowing for an ending where it lives. If this ending is never resolved, I swear to God. Needless to say, this throws a huge wrench into the works as the Pale King, or anyone for that matter, never shows any foreknowledge of the Godseekers, but the Pale King not knowing is especially a problem, as he acts like they aren't part of the set future at all, resulting in many contradictions if this theory on his foresight is taken as true. So while I'm at it, I'll try to establish a rule for the foresight. Whenever the Pale King uses his foresight, he only sees the effects of things currently at play. He can't see the entirety of the set future, as that would, once again, potentially break the plot of the entire game. This way, we can also get rid of the Godseekers as a problem for this theory, because they weren't even considering coming to Hallownest until the Pale King died, an event he likely couldn't see past even before it happened. Therefore, he never even knows of the Godseekers' existence. Another large problem to fix would have to be the White Lady's wording of the Hollow Knight's defect. Its supposed strength was ill-judged, it was tarnished by an idea instilled, suggests that the vessel's corruption had come as a surprise, and that it might not have ever been properly hollow. Given its supposed strength was ill-judged, no counter-argument from me here. There would be no reason for the Pale King to lie to his wife in a way that makes him look out to be of ill-judgment. It also suggests that the idea instilled of the Hollow Knight's love for its father was not something of acceptance that the Hollow Knight would be defective anyway, more that the Pale King had simply shown him fatherhood, as any proper father would, despite knowing what he was going to do to it. So then let's take the ill-judged part of her dialogue and turn it into he looked into its future and only saw the solution that ended up being temporary, or perhaps the track that it was on without the love for its father in its mind. Reasonably content with that, he either didn't see the knight hanging off the ledge and simply asked the Hollow Knight to follow, or saw the knight and decided not to help for what could be a myriad of reasons. Be it not wanting to sacrifice two children, not caring since he already has a vessel, or just not wanting to train two vessels together, which would risk an emotional bond. That question still remains, but I'll run with him not having seen the knight to maintain my sanity. Now comes the ceiling. With the Hollow Knight chosen, the Pale King has a couple of priorities. First, prepare the vessel for its containment. Second, find any way to prolong said containment of said vessel, starting off with Hornet, the child of Hera the Beast that the Pale King had dalliance with as bargain for Hera becoming a dreamer, one of 3 bugs to go into eternal sleep so that they can maintain a barrier which the Hollow Knight, the Pale King's child and vessel of the Moth Goddess residing in the dream realm that's causing the infection, is locked behind. Seriously, if you ever wonder why game stories have a different feel to them, just try to describe a random game's lore or plot without context. With Hornet essentially acting as Hallownest's guardian, I don't think we have to go too in-depth with that. Now here's where my theory may become quite shaky. With the Pale King realizing that the Hollow Knight won't be able to hold the infection forever, he continued to research the Void and placed pieces for a lost vessel in Hallownest to become fully hollow and unify the Void to take on the Radiance. Again, he could have looked into the future to see if his research could help. Creating a truly Void vessel, and by extension defeating the Radiance through that vessel, is the part where the idea of the Pale King having foresight letting him see into the future becomes crucial. The attributes of such a vessel would be a hardened warrior handling the magic of a pale being and skilled platforming to physically fight the Radiance, an awoken dream nail wielder to break into the dream realm where the Radiance resides, and a vessel with the Void unified under it to completely absorb the Radiance in its darkness. So how do we set the stage for all of this to happen? I think that the Pale King ticks the first box through Hornet. She seems to know the whole goal of the vessels as she says that she knows what the knight would do and that she cannot allow it, which creates a slight inconsistency I'll have to address, but it also explains her full 180 when you meet her at City of Tears and she instructs you towards Kingdom's Edge, where she guards what gives you access to the Abyss, asking that you prove your worth in a fight to either your death or her defeat. If the knight had a mind, I do not think it would agree with this trade to say the least. But then she'll allow you the King's Brand and to go where all the vessel's corpses have been left, where you can attain the Shade Cloak and Void Heart, also explaining why when you defeat her in Green Path, despite having the strength to possibly go on or fight harder, in a fashion similar to her second fight, she simply runs away, though that may be explained by the fact that fighting harder could mean to the death, and why in the achievements her first battle is described as a test of resolve and her second as proof of resolve. She also knows of the 2 main paths that the knight can take once you've gained the Shade Cloak, and prefers you choose the second one in which you take the Radiance head on, and also knows that you can unite the Void under some circumstance. Once the fight against the Hollow Knight comes, she knows exactly how to assist you, exposing it in a way so that you can dream nail it, implying that she was given direct knowledge of all this, perhaps from the Pale King himself. Which brings us to the contradiction with her stating she cannot allow you to do what she ends up assisting you in. It turns out when you talk to her in the City of Tears, she confesses to having underestimated you, but since the first battle she has guessed the truth. She then offers the path to the grave in Ash where you will have your second battle with her. If you're somehow able to dreamnail her, she has 2 quotes she could show that are of interest. Could this one succeed? Is it strong enough? She seems to know the exact path you're on and has tested others before as a direct trial, which to me, when all put together, sounds like she initially fully intended for you to die when you first met her after she had just killed another knight, and once she saw your potential pertaining to the plan in contrast to her underestimation, backed off and waited until the kingdom's edge for full proof of your resolve. Now let's get back to the Dreamnail. We're back with the mods to talk about the very thing that allows you access to all endings. The Dreamnail is essentially an old weapon that the Moth tribe used to wield, but as you could tell with the last remaining member of the tribe being an octogenarian, this practice has mostly died out. However, this same final member is looking for the wielder, a mythic being that is extremely versed in such a practice. The Pale King, knowing how all of this would affect the sage's actions should a stranger come to be stuck in the dream realm, puts the dreamer's memorial in the resting grounds where the sage resides. Seeing the dreamers would stick the knight into the dream realm, and the sage would give the knight the dream nail to get out and continue to train it to awoken wielder status should the knight pursue that. This, along with putting the white palace inside of the dream realm, where it hides one of 2 white fragments and is blocked by a dream barrier that requires an awakened wielder. And lo, we're finally here. When the knight with the awoken dream nail gets to the White Palace, it'll be met with this. But why? Well, despite my convoluted explanations for everything else, I think the answer here is rather simple. There is no way that the actual palace was anything like this. It would be hard to describe it as a palace if so. Considering the path through this place is one filled with obstacles and tests tailored so that only the strongest will survive, it would make sense for this to be considered exactly that. So the saws and spikes and thorns and guards and spikes and saws would simply be to keep out intruders. I know, right? All this confusion, all these beams, and it's just security for the second half of the King's Soul, and another test/trial to ensure that the vessel who gets the white fragment is someone who truly earns and has the skill to be worthy of it, much like how it gets the King's brand by proving its worth to hoard it. No, we still have a lot more to go for with the Pale King prepared for potential vessels, so that whichever one was to take on the Radiance would be the one that is prepared for a confrontation of such magnitude. Though there is still the major problem in that said path is one of 5 different endings, and that the Knight could potentially not have any engagement with this potential plan of the Pale King's, being not discovering the Queen's Gardens, not awakening the Dream Nail and just going for the standard absorption of the Radiance, no Void Heart, or worse yet, get the Void Heart and sue the Hollow Knight and still just absorb the Radiance normally. Better even worse yet, don't even go to the Black Egg, just break the Godseekers out, go through all their pantheons, maybe give them the Delicate Flower for some reason, and ascend to the Hyper God of all Void, allowing the Hollow Knight to break out. Fuck it. Due to this problem, I'm going to have to make an additional adjustment to the Pale King's foresight. Since this direction that the Knight is meant to go towards is one of many, we could then conclude that the Pale King's foresight is that of possible futures, with everything in play. So don't worry, nothing changes of the original reasoning for what he saw in the Hollow Knight's future, as no love for its father was still the Hollow Knight's state of mind at the time, and thus never had any sort of impact on the future seen by the Pale King. As a reminder, I will also clarify that he still doesn't know of the Godseekers, as they had no plans to leave for Hallownest until he died. Following along? No? Cool, we're on the same track. All of that out of the way, we can now move on to the King's Soul and the positioning of the Pale King and the White Lady. You remember the King's Soul, right? Because I certainly don't at this rate. There's a couple of ways I think this part of the plan could work. My idea here is that through some means the Pale King found out how the Void could be unified to create true emptiness within a vessel, taking form in the Void Heart. What makes this part complicated is that the Void Heart is created from the King's Soul, which was originally created through the union between the Pale King and the White Lady, acting as a collective soul if this line is anything to go by. So it bears our once fractured soul. This brings us the question on how he figures that connection out, where I could take the avenue of simply saying foresight again, but something about that bothers me. With the rules I've given for the Pale King's foresight, there isn't anything contradicting if I say that, and it's the only way for him to know that makes sense. I was originally looking to suggest that he experimented with the Void to find this out, but that implies he somehow created the Void Heart, but then demade it back into the King's Soul so that it can be given later, or that he came up with the idea and figured out the exact schematics to make such a thing, and just tested the events in his head, in which the answer would still essentially be foresight anyway, all whilst there is no mention of modification to the King's Soul in any dialogue nor presence of such experimentation in the White Palace, when it would be far more streamlined for him to have simply looked into the possible futures of giving a vessel the King's Soul in search of a new solution and seeing everything that happens to the Knight in the game, while not giving it to the Hollow Knight as it has already been corrupted and isn't properly hollow. He then splits up the King's Soul with the White Lady and tells both her and Hornet about how this will work, and the plan in its entirety, before going to his chosen hiding spot in the White Palace, and the White Lady goes to hers in her cocoon in the gardens, both of which having their separate obstacles. All of this evidenced by a couple of things. When you first meet the White Lady, she states that one like you was awaited, so that one may be gifted a half of the King's soul, insinuating she had a reason and a purpose for it instead of just sentimentality, since if that was so, why not give it to Hornet? When you talk to the White Lady with the King's soul on, she essentially tells you to go to the birthplace. I have no idea why she refers to you in the third person, wondering what's at the heart of the charm, indicating she knows its usefulness, but not quite the specifics of how the charm functions. When you get the Void Heart, she's in awe and wonder, but not surprised. In fact, she knows what has happened to the knight and that it had some sort of revelation to transform into such a being, and knows that the future lies within its choice from here on. So, like the Pale King, the White Lady had her obstacles, the defenses of the possibly once beautiful gardens, those being thorns, platforms, a shade dash gate, something only able to be bypassed by something in the abyss which is blocked by something that only Hornet can grant the key to, and Drya, until Drya dies and the Traitor Lord just kind of stays behind for some reason, unless he just arrived with a second attack as soon as you arrive, and that was essentially what all of his boss battle was. Then we have the Pale King, who hides behind a dream barrier, King's molds, wings molds, and yes, the copious amount of buzzsaws, thorns, and spikes. When we finally come to the end of the gauntlet, we find his body, seemingly physically hollowed out into just a shell, but still with one last thought: no cost too great. Here we go. Why is he in the White Palace? Well, as stated earlier, when he figures out the King's Soul and Void Heart, he decides to keep his half of it in a safe place, so he seals himself in the Dream Realm behind a dream barrier. The other thing to keep in mind is the physical location of the Dream Realm entrance to the White Palace, which is located where the Radiants would never dare go, the Ancient Basin, one of the closest places to the Abyss that isn't the Abyss, and an abundance of void. Yet he knows that he has to wait, and wait, and wait for the worthy vessel, but the void itself has other ideas. It harbors a hunger for anything that contains light, and with the Pale King described as being of a pale light, considering what it ends up doing to the goddess who is representative of light, we can assume how the void feels about him. We also know, thanks to Silk Song, that the void is both a place and the substance. Every instance of the void, the substance, is also an extension of the void, the place. Hence, during the Sibling of the Void ending, the Knight and the rest of the Shades are able to come to Hornet's aid when the rest of the void was about to just tear her and Lace apart. So, when there's a bunch of King's molds, beings made from void, that have suspiciously crumbled right outside of the final resting place of the Pale King, it's easy to conclude what happened. This is also evidenced through the void particles in the room that shrink instead of fading away like dust, the sheer utter darkness of the room, and the fact that he seems to be completely hollow, making similar sounds when hit as the corpses of his children when their bodies were hitting the floor. He knows what he's doing is a sacrifice needed for Hallownest's preservation, an ultimate cost that still won't be one for him to back down paying, and he reminds himself of that as the void begins to take him, until he's left with nothing. So, to summarize, let's describe the events of the game with hysteria as they unfold in chronological order. The worm arrives in Hallownest and reincarnates himself in the shape of the bugs of the kingdom that he eventually rules over. One of the groups of the kingdom, the moths, have a god that they were created by and once worshipped in the Radiance that they abandoned due to the new king. With that, a prosperous kingdom begins to rise with the advancements that the king brought to it, only for the Radiance to come back with the infection to bring all bugs under her hive mind. This virus plagues one's thoughts and will in order to corrupt it and turn one hostile against anyone who isn't infected. While this pervades through the kingdom, the Pale King works on repurposing the void to create a vessel to absorb the radiance and infection within a shell, while having an artificial consciousness of its own. He starts by making constructs, metal exoskeletons as armor, and the void given a mold to create a body that would be put inside the armor along with a will to serve the king. And it works. He then begins to do a decent amount of reproduction to provide powerful shells, then offers them up to his programmed void. But most of them drop dead, damn near all of them, with very few exceptions that took the void in and eventually survived. The Pale King ended up taking the first one to immediately survive, seeing a future of the infection and the radiance contained. This could have been because it was technically the future but the sealing was only temporary, or this was simply where the future was headed before the Pale King's fatherliness came into play. Either way, the Pale King raised and trained his pure vessel, possibly unknowing of the vessels alive left behind, though in raising it he ends up bringing a different corruption. The vessel's love for its father had been instilled, leaving it vulnerable to the infection. He has 3 bugs go into eternal sleep to add an extra barrier to the vessel and eventually seals it away. There is peace, but only temporarily, as eventually the infection breaks the vessel and unleashes itself upon the kingdom once more. Since it's in their programming to see it through, vessels begin to come back to Hallownest to seal the infection within themselves, some of which are killed by Hornet or Hallownest in general, with the Pale King discovering what the King's Soul Charm could do once given to a vessel in a possible future, seeing it being able to defeat the Radiance if it so chose. He and the White Lady go into hiding after the Pale King sets pieces for a worthy knight to gather and face the horde of the infection. If everything goes as he plans, a knight who has long escaped the abyss comes back to Hallownest, fights and defeats Hornet along with many others, gets the Dream Nail training to its awakened form, proves its resolve to Hornet, earning it the King's brand and gaining the Shade Cloak. It attains both halves of the King's soul, navigating all of the challenges that come with that, goes back to its birthplace, Dream Nails itself to reach deep within its own memory and discover its truth, releasing the emptiness within and bringing the void under its will. After killing the 3 dreamers, it comes to the Temple of the Black Egg to fight the Hollow Knight, with Hornet assisting mid-battle, providing an opening for the knight to pierce into the mind of the Hollow Knight and come face to face with the Radiance, ultimately defeating it while taking its own life, and the life of the knight who once, now no longer, carried the burden of maintaining Hallownest's perpetuation. Or at least, that was his plan. I'm under your bed, and I bid you good night. Another large problem to fix would have to be the White Lady's wording of the... Another large problem to fix would have to be the White Lady's wording of the Hollow Knight's defect. Its supposed strength was ill-judged. It was... Why can't I read this fucking paragraph? The question still remains, but I'll run with him not having seen the knight to maintain my sanity. I'm certainly going to lose it if I have to do this page for any longer. So, how do we set the... Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I'm recording. Yep. So, how do we set the stage for all of this to happen? I think that the Pale King takes the first box through Hornet. She seems to know the whole goal of the vessels, as she says that she knows what the white? She also knows of the 2 main paths. She also knows of the 2 main paths. She also knows of the 2 main paths that the knight can take once you've gained the Shade Cloak. She also knows of them. If you're somehow able to dream nail her, she has 2 quotes she could throw shatter of interest. If you're somehow